Would you like to learn how to harness the power of a more plant-forward diet? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is Ian K. Smith, MD. We're going to talk about plant power. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio in Southern California and Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Did you know that the number of Americans following a plant-based diet has increased by almost 10 million over the past 15 years? And it's not a trend, it's a movement. And today we're going to talk about the benefits of evolving to a more plant-based diet. My special guest is the amazing Dr. Ian Smith, MD. It's his second time on the show. And let me tell you a little bit about him. Although I only have 40 minutes, I could read his resume and we just keep going. But he's the author of a whole bunch of #1 New York Times best-selling books: Shred, Super Shred, Blast the Sugar Out, The Clean 20, Ancient 9, Clean and Mean. His recent novel, Wolf Points, the second in the series of the Ashe Cayne detective series. It's been picked up for a TV series. Hopefully we'll have a little time to talk about that. Dr. Ian served as a solo host on the national syndicated Emmy Award-winning TV show, The Doctors. He's a longtime medical contributor to the Emmy Award-winning Rachael Ray Show. His podcast, Conversations with Dr. Ian Smith, is popular and informative, and he's got so much more. But let's get right into the interview and welcome Dr. Ian Smith back to Guys Radio with his new book, Plant Power: Flip Your Plate, Clean and Change Your Weight.
Thank you, man. Glad to be back with you. It's awesome.
Okay, cool. So today we're going to focus on the new book. But I'm so glad you're with us today because I'm a longtime pescatarian and I'm a plant-based diet proponent. And your new book, out, I believe, April 5th or 6th, comes at a perfect time, especially with so many people having been hanging out at home for much of the past 2 years and kind of waltzing past the refrigerator like 100 times a day. So what drove your inspiration to write this book, Plant Power, Dr. Ian?
Well, I have been a meat eater all my life. I like meat. I like a good cut of steak. I like fish. I love salmon, for example. So I've been a meat eater for a long time. But I also realized that as I got older, that my body did not process meat as well. I tended to be a little more sluggish. My energy levels kind of dipped after a heavy meat meal. And I just honestly said to myself, I need to look into whether or not tapering, not eliminating, but tapering my meat consumption may make a difference in how I feel. And it did. I wanted to try to become more plant-based. Obviously, I have known about the power of plants forever, but I also felt as though that the way that meat was vilified was not fair either. I think that eating some meat is not bad for you. So the kind of deal I made with myself was, could I reduce the amount of meat that I eat, increase the amount of plant-based foods? And if I could do that, I'm still going to have my steak every once in a while, my ribs every once in a while, but I'm not going to have it every other day. And so the idea was for 4 weeks to try to bring myself from a 70% animal-based diet, transition that to a 70% plant-based diet, and my other 30% would be animal-based. And I did it over a 4-week period. And I thought going into it that I was going to really miss all of my steaks and my burgers and things like that. And honestly, I didn't. And my energy level picked up. I felt better. I felt lighter, if I could express it that way. I just felt more sprightly. And I really believe that going more plant-based made my mind sharper. I felt like I was less sluggish and my thinking was more acute. So that's what got me. My personal, I say in the beginning of Plant Power, I say this is probably my most personal book in the sense that I did this myself. This was my own kind of transformation. And then I tested it in my Facebook groups, some of the weeks on the plan, and people loved it. And they didn't miss the meat and they lost weight and dropped their blood pressure. And so voila, Plant Power is born.
Wow, amazing. Well, you just answered my first question, so let me go to the next one. Amazing. There seems to be a meat substitute for everything, even though these products are processed to some extent. Like I eat Impossible Burgers and Better Burgers and Beyond Burgers, and then there's a new one that's out now that's pretty good also, that's also pea protein, excuse me. But these meat substitutes, are they healthier than eating meat? Where I'm coming from is that some of them have pea protein, some of them have soy that people have a problem with. And bottom line, they're all processed. Now, I eat them, but I favor the ones that are pea protein versus the soy. What are your thoughts on that? Because so many people are getting involved with the meat alternatives, and most of the people who've tried them are saying, wow, pretty interesting. And after a few tries, they come back.
Well, yes, the meat alternative business has gotten really big because so many people are becoming more plant-based. And as you said in the beginning, it's not a trend, it's actually a real movement. And so you have millions and millions of people who are becoming more plant-based, who are looking to find something to replace the meat. This is the first thing I would caution people. Meat is meat. You cannot imitate in any healthy way the taste of meat and sometimes even the texture of meat, right? And so if you are looking for something that is exactly like a hamburger, and if someone is producing it, it probably isn't very healthy. And like you said, most of these substitutes are processed. And the reason why they are processed is because the manufacturer is trying to meet the demand of the consumer. It's got to be just like the hamburger. It's got to taste like it. It's got to feel like it. Well, guess what? Hamburgers are unique. Okay, beef is unique. So that's the first thing I want to caution people is that if you're really going to become more plant-based and you're going to look for these substitutes, do not have in your mind that it's going to taste like a burger. That's not the idea. The idea is it could be similar, but it's not going to be a carbon copy. These are the things in the book. In chapter 2, I tell people what to look out for when they look for meat substitutes. First, look at the protein content. Make sure that you want at least 10 grams of protein for every 3-ounce serving. That's important. Look at the calories. Be very careful. A lot of these substitutes are full of calories, and we don't want that to be the case. Third, the numbers actually matter, okay? You want to make sure that you are not replacing this meat product with something that's fully processed with chemicals and all these different ingredients. So look at the number of ingredients inside of the substitute. If it's more than 5, then it is likely a very highly processed product that you want to stay away from. Also, be careful of the sodium. People don't talk about this enough. Sodium is extremely important when it comes to blood pressure. The higher the sodium you consume, you tend to hold water more. It can lead to high blood pressure. So make sure that these processed substitutes do not have a lot of sodium. And then you want to also make sure you look at the fats and sugars. You want to make sure that it doesn't have things like trans fats. You want to look for the word hydrogenated. So you see the word hydrogenated oil, that means trans fat, by the way, and you want to stay away from that. And so looking at those things in a meat substitute can go a long way in putting you in the direction of what is healthier.
Okay, great answer, and thank you. So informative. Let's talk about meat just a little bit more. Now, I transitioned off meat. I actually ended up having a detox, and I didn't feel very well for a while, and then I got past it, and I had the exact similar results as you had. More energy, just felt lighter, and I decided I'm just going to go with it. Now, do I miss? I was a steak eater and a hamburger eater, and loved meat. But I stopped, and I think your style of, hey, listen, if you can integrate it at a lesser often into your diet, it can be a good thing. I'm one of these people, I'm in or I'm out. But what's your overall take on that? And how did you make the transition? And did you have any challenges along the way when you kind of laddered down from your meat consumption?
Yeah, I've been saying for a long time that people underestimate how our palates and our stomach, how they can change. And, when people are accustomed to eating large meals, for example, and then they start eating smaller meals, in their mind, they say, there's no way my body's going to work with this. It's always going to be hungry because I'm used to consuming 2,000 calories versus 1,500 calories. And the truth of the matter is that our body is extremely adaptable. And so when it comes to eating meat, like you mentioned, I eat bacon and pancakes and bacon. I eat what everyone else eats. And I was a little worried about whether or not I would have these cravings for these meat products. But because I slowly tapered the meat, I didn't go cold turkey. and say, no red meat, no fish. I didn't do that. I just slowly, instead of having, and in the book, I give you a 4-week system that you can do this, but instead of having, let's say, red meat 4 times a week, which I probably was having, I said, let's go to 3 times a week. Then let's go to 2 times a week. And let's replace that with more pasta, more vegetables, and things like that. And so for me, it was very seamless because I did it slowly. And so by the time I got to my 4th week, where I was now 70% plant-based, I didn't have any cravings for meat because I was happy with the frequency that I was going to get the meat going forward. And I think I think the vast majority of people want to be plant-based, but I don't think they want to be a vegan or vegetarian. Okay. And that's what I mean by plant-based. And by the way, nothing against vegans and vegetarians, completely fine. But I think that the broad swath of the country and most people in general would like to eat more plants, but they also don't want to give up chicken or red meat and some fish. You're a pescatarian. Fish is great. And so I think that this is a way that people can do it and reduce things and get the benefits of the plants without giving up all of their meat and fish.
You mentioned, and this is guys radio, so we want to make sure we have a message out there for the guys as much as possible. So a lot of guys are athletes, and there's even, you mentioned bodybuilders in the book, and the concern would be for a lot of guys that, oh, if I stop eating as much meat as I do, I'm going to have problems with my muscle mass, my muscle tone, my endurance, my strength. And that's not really the case. Tell us about that, Dr. Ian.
That is a common belief and a misperception, actually, because there are a ridiculous amount of non-animal based protein foods where you can get as much protein, sometimes even more protein than you would get through an animal product. And so there are tons of weightlifters and bodybuilders, you name it, who are vegan, vegetarian. They don't eat red meat at all. And so for everyone, guys who are, and I'm a weightlifter myself, I am here to tell you that you can get as much protein, and good protein, by the way, because then the argument becomes, yeah, but the meat protein is better than the plant protein. No, not the case. And so I want to also let people know that even though you're getting a lot of meat, a lot of protein from red meat, you're also getting a lot of fat and a lot of other things that are not great for you from a health perspective. So I hope to dispel the idea that many may have that you need to have red meat in order to get the best protein. Do hamburgers and steaks have a lot of protein? Yeah, but so do lentils and chickpeas and other legumes. And you can eat those with less calories and less fats and less expensive, actually, too. So yeah, that's an important thing that people should be aware of.
You think that, and then we can move more towards the plant-based because that's what we're all about. But one last question on meat itself. Do you think the reason that you feel like you have more energy, I do also, is that the body has to work so much harder to break down the the tendons and everything in the meat that we consume, that while it's doing that, it can't be doing other repairs in the body?
Yeah, digesting meat is extremely laborious for your body, your gastrointestinal tract. It requires a lot of work. And it takes time, by the way. I mean, it takes much longer to process and digest meat than it would be, for example, pasta with some veggies in it. And so, yeah, I think that people have to understand that the processing of meat makes you sluggish because your gastrointestinal tract is so focused on putting blood flow and energy to be able to, like you say, break down the soft tissue, break down the muscle fibers so that it can be digested and used, that we end up, draining ourselves of energy. I mean, you've had big steak meals in the past where after the meal, you're like, for the next 2 hours, you just want to go somewhere and sit on the couch, turn on a football game and go to sleep. And so meat does do that. And I think people will see once they eat less of it, that they do have more energy and are more alert.
Okay, let's talk about the book a little more. My special guest, the amazing Dr. Ian K. Smith, MD, Plant Power, Fill Your Plate, Change Your Weight. Tell us a little bit about the plate itself, because everybody listening, I'm sure, is saying, that sounds interesting, but actually, what do I do? How do I do this? How do I get myself off meat? How do I find the substitutes? How do I reorganize my plate itself? You mentioned going from 70-30 to changing the ratio there. What should the plate look like? Should it be 50% vegetables and fruits? How many carbs should be and carbohydrates should be there? How much protein then? Should they do this all the time? The 4-week plan, how does that work with all of this?
So the plan basically starts off with a 5-day warm up. And the idea is to kind of get yourself mentally and physically ready to start consuming less of the meat and more of the plants. And so I start with the 5-day warm up. And then it goes into a 4-week plan where every day is spelled out for you. And it's a point system. It's a very simple point system. And I say to you, I'm going to just randomly pick a day here. So for example, on week 1, day 1, okay, you have a choice of a shake, a fruit smoothie, or scrambled eggs with cheese and veggies. That's your meal 1. And then you have a snack. Then you have meal 2. And so every day I lay out for you what your meal options are, okay? And you choose, hey, I want to have this, I want to have that. And then you have a certain number of points that you're allowed to eat that are animal-based, and then a certain number of points that are plant-based. And over the 4 weeks, even though we start with more animal-based points, we're going to flip it. We're going to flip that number. So your big number now becomes plant-based and not animal-based. On page 26 in the book, I give a representation of what Harvard Medical School has very nicely printed at what a healthy eating plate looks like. And I'll say for those who are listening and watching what it is. So about 25% of your plate should be whole grains. About 25% of your plate should be healthy protein. About 30% should be about vegetables. And then the 20% should be about fruits. That's what a healthy plate, an ideal plate looks like. Now, are you always going to have veggies, fruits, and all these things in every meal? Absolutely not. But the purpose of showing people what a healthy eating plate looks like is you can still take parts of it. You can still make sure that vegetables are at least a third of your plate, right? Or you can make sure that if you're having protein, you're getting protein from healthier sources, whether it's plant-based protein or it's seafood. You and I like seafood, or maybe it's chicken, grilled chicken. And so that's the idea, is that I want people to walk away from this book not eating perfectly. I never expect anyone to eat perfectly, but at least having an idea that when you sit down to dinner, or you're cooking a meal or going out, which a lot of us may do, that you're at least organizing a plate that has these different elements. It becomes your guide, your visual guide. And I think people find it easier to stick to a plan when they kind of have a visualization of what it should look like.
Okay, I eat a lot of wild-caught shrimp, so I was pleased to read in your book that shellfish helps with your immune system. It boosts it. And many people think that it boosts your cholesterol also, and that there's problems eating too much seafood. What's in shellfish that boosts your immune system? My wife wants to know.
Well, here's what's interesting. People have to understand that there are very few perfect foods, right? There are very few foods that it only gives you greatness and doesn't have any bad to it, right? I mean, there's always a little trade-off somewhere. So, something may be a little higher in something, but it also has a huge, nutrient load of a particular vitamin, for example. And so when you asked me that question, what caught me right away was, people have to understand that the perfect food may not exist. There may be some that are close to perfect, but there are a lot of perfect foods. And so you need to understand that just because, it has a little bit of bad or something, the question is, what is the net positive? Is it mostly good? And when you look at shellfish, for example, and by the way, on page 15, I talk about things that help to boost your immune system. Things like almonds and broccoli, citrus, turmeric, yogurt, shellfish, red bell peppers. And these things are very good because what they do is they can actually affect chemicals in your body. And the idea is by them causing chemical alteration, they can actually assist in boosting your immune fighters, right? So our immune system basically is a system of soldiers. And these soldiers go out and attack enemies, the foreign bodies that come into our system, like COVID, for example, enemies come into our system. Our immune system has all these different armies. Some are naval, some are Air Force, some are Marines, some are Army. They're different types, and they fight differently, and they're effective in different situations. And what shellfish does, along with these other things, is they help boost, they help stimulate our immune system to be better fighters.
People get happy when they eat, Dr. Smith, but sometimes they get too happy. What role does serotonin play in our dietary choices?
Yeah. So serotonin is a very important chemical for our happiness, for our mood. And there are foods that can actually boost our serotonin. For example, fermented foods like kefir and sauerkraut and kimchi, certain types of fish, fruits and vegetables that are fresh, beans and peas, legumes, they can actually boost our mood because they actually boost the production of serotonin. The downside sometimes is that there are certain foods that boost our serotonin or make us feel happy, but they are not necessarily the healthiest of foods. And so there's this trade-off. You want to make sure that you're boosting your serotonin, thus your happiness, with foods that are also healthy, because you can also boost your happiness. And dopamine, for example, is another chemical that's important, by eating chocolate cake all the time. Chocolate cake, can cause you to release, this dopamine and this reward. So you get into this cycle of pleasure, reward, right? And so, you eat this, you get pleasure, then you want more of it. And it becomes this cycle. And so I think people need to be aware. And by the way, when someone is depressed, they give them antidepressants. And one of the ways that antidepressants work is to increase the amount of serotonin that's available to the brain. And so there are foods connected to serotonin increase.
Okay, I'd like to touch on a couple of specific foods that are kind of staples in how Americans eat, if it's okay with you. So let's start with eggs. There's so many choices when you go to the supermarket now. When we were kids, you go there and there were the eggs there. You get a dozen eggs. Now you've got cage-free, pasture-raised, organic. There's so many different options for eggs. And then there's so many different opinions about, well, should you eat eggs or not? Should you eat the yolk or not? I just saw one doctor say, oh, you should eat 4 eggs a day. And another said, don't eat eggs. It grows bacteria inside you, and the bacteria inside you feeds off of it. It's not good. It's very confusing for people. So I'd like to get your take on some of these. What's your feeling about eggs, and what should people look for when making their own decisions in the supermarket?
I agree with you. It's extremely confusing. And it's tough when you're a layperson to try to, weave your way through the science and different doctors who you like saying different things. My take is pretty simple. I think that eggs are good for you. I think eggs get a bad rap. I think that eggs offer a lot of nutritional value. And so I am a pro egg person. Now, I will say, however, how your egg was farmed can also be very important. So I believe that the way the animals are treated, not from a humane standpoint, that's another conversation, by the way, which are important, but how your animals were treated from an environmental standpoint is very important. So you would like your animal to be cage-free. You would like them to be pasture-raised, out in the open, out in the wild. You don't want them to have antibiotics and other kinds of synthetic things that are injected into them to make them bigger and fluffier and more resistant to disease. You have to be very careful. So I believe the good things to look for are organic, kind of says a lot, but also cage-free and pasture-raised, antibiotic-free. Those are the things you look. So when I go to my grocery store, I look for those words on my eggs, and I agree. There, you go to the egg shelf, and there are all these different things to look at. And listen, eggs are not overly expensive, and I agree that the quote unquote healthier eggs tend to be a little more expensive, but I'm willing to pay the difference, because I do believe at the end of the day, not just from an environmental standpoint, not just from not humane, but how they treat the animal standpoint, I do believe from a health standpoint, a nutritional standpoint, those eggs are probably better for us in the long run.
I agree with you completely. And I'm just as a regular consumer, just as a guy's guy, I know we buy pasture raised eggs, and the yolks are bright. They're big, they're bright yellow, and the eggs actually seem more substantial. They're not that runny. There seems to be more to them. So we pay a little bit more, but it figured like, well, wouldn't you rather just have better product? And it seems like a better product. And I think it's about, as you said, how the chickens are and the poultry are how they're raised and treated is a big part of it, and then what they're taking in, because that ends up what we're taking in. Let's move to milk, because there's so much confusion also and conflicting opinions about dairy. I have an 8-year-old, and my wife gives him raw milk, and he loves it. And I was like, shouldn't it be pasteurized? And she's like, well, you don't want that ultra pasteurized, because that's going to, it has some good things, but it has other bad things. So then it becomes a whole nother section of the dairy section, where how many different types of milk there are. I personally, I don't use dairy that way. I have almond milk, coconut milk. I use the plant-based alternatives, and you know what? They're fine. So I don't really need milk for anything, but we figure hey, my kid's a growing boy. He's tall, he's healthy, he's just doing terrific. So he likes it. I'm like, okay. So what's your thoughts on milk?
I think that dairy, the overall category of dairy, has just gotten a bad rap. I don't think dairy is bad. I think people make a mistake when they say, don't have dairy, don't have carbs. It's not about not having these big categories. It's about choosing the best in those categories, right? And so you want to make sure that if you're having dairy, that how is the dairy farmed? That's the important part. Where is it coming from? And so I think that with dairy offers a lot. My goodness, it offers calcium and vitamin D and all other kinds of new protein, all other kind of great important nutrients that we need, that yes, you may be able to get them in other places, but they are chock full in dairy. And so what I tell people when it comes to milk, I don't believe that people need to eat full fat milk, and I don't think most people do anymore. So I do believe you should eat milk that is, if you're going to eat dairy milk, that is less full fat for sure. Pasteurization really is a whole different conversation. It's a conversation about how to basically clean the milk and making sure that it's free of diseases. Obviously, cow's milk, is coming from an animal, it could have all types of germs in it. And so the idea is to try to pasteurize it. But many people, like your wife, have been fine with raw milk. And here's the interesting thing, is that if you're consuming raw milk and you're not having a reaction to it, by all means, that means that your system is able to process it and is doing well with it. And so a lot of these things is about trial and error. It's about how you react to it, because I may not react, the same way to the raw milk as you. And so people have to not just take the headlines and just say, oh my goodness, I must have raw milk or I can't have raw milk. Instead, they got to go beneath the headlines, read the fine print, and try it themselves and see how they respond to it.
So true. Such a great answer too. I mean, our thinking is that we have an 8-year-old. You want the calcium, growing bones. Maybe when he's my age, he's not going to be taking full dairy like I don't. But for a little kid growing up, if he doesn't have a bad reaction, okay. So it's a lot of it is common sense, and I think that's so wonderful about how you roll in just overall. And then this book, Plant Power. Flip your plate, change your weight. Let me give you another one that's confusing for people. And it's interesting, your take on it in the book is organic and, organic versus non-GMO and just regular foods. It seems like my take from what I read is that, you're cool with organic, but it's not necessarily a must-have for certain foods, because there's a lot of misinformation and confusion about organic and the benefits of that, when some foods you want organic and other foods it may not be must have.
People have to understand the history of organic. Organic started off not as a health movement, but as an environmental movement. It was about changing the quality of farming to protect the environment, because traditional farming using pesticides and other chemicals, understandably, to be able to allow the crops to survive and not be eaten by bugs, we use things to kill them. And that's traditional farming. Organic farming started to say, well, listen, yeah, we are using these pesticides, but they're not great for the overall environment. we're saving the crop, but we're hurting the environment. And so organic started. The idea of, we're going to do this natural, we're going to move the crops around, till the soil, all these things that come with organic farming, which, by the way, is more expensive because it's more labor intensive, and because the crops, you tend to yield less crops per square feet because you're going to lose crops because you don't have things killing the bugs, right? So let's get it clear. Organic was an environmental movement first, not a health movement. Now, on the back of that, we realize, wow, insecticides or pesticides that can be used in traditional farming, they could have residue that's left over. So imagine you kind of spray, your apples with pesticide. You don't want the bugs to eat the apples. And the idea is that you're supposed to wash off the remaining pesticide. But sometimes there's a little bit left, a little bit, trace amount. And the argument was, well, if people consume too much of the pesticide residue, then they're going to get sick from it. It could be bad for your system. And the truth of the matter is, yes, if you consume enough pesticide, obviously that's meant to kill bugs, it's not good for the human body. But, and this is a big but, the amount of pesticide residue, if there is any, it is so infinitesimally small that you would have to consume barrels and barrels and barrels of these crops in order to have enough of the pesticide residue reach a threshold where it becomes toxic to your body. Now, that being said, if some people say, well, I'm still worried that if I go to a regular grocery store and buy just a regular apples, it's not organic, I'm still worried that there could be something on the skin left over. The answer is the dirty dozen. And that is, if you are going to buy organic, then buy those foods in which you are going to be eating the skin. Because remember, the purpose of it is to avoid the residue that's on the skin. So eating apples and pears and grapes and other berries, yes, if you're going to buy organic, buy those. But why would you buy an organic banana? You peel the skin of a banana. And so the meat or the pulp of the banana is the same. And so whether it's organic or not organic. And there's no nutritional difference. People think in their minds that organic means it's healthier, like there are more vitamins and more nutrients. Not at all. And so in the book, I give people a list of what the dirty dozen organic things that they should buy. Apples, cherries, grapes, kale, peppers, celery, peaches, nectarines, pears, tomatoes, spinach. These are things, big if, you want to buy organic and you want to be really cautious, that's what you would buy. But, when I go to the store and see, organic oranges or organic bananas, organic lemons, why?
Avocados,
Why?
right?
Huh?
Avocados, same thing, right?
Why?
Yeah.
Why? So anyway,
My-
and just real fast. And the reason why organic is expensive is not because it's healthier. Don't fall into that trap. It's more expensive because it's more expensive to do organic style of farming. That's why it's more expensive, not because it has all these great health advantages that non-organic doesn't have.
I would suggest to people, and correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, is that to me, the bottom line is taste an organic strawberry though versus a non-organic strawberry, or an organic lemon even. And I know a lemon has a thick skin versus non-organic. And I have found that you get a lot more juice and it's a lot tastier. The flavor is better with organic products. So whatever they're doing, I'll pay a little bit more if it's going to taste better. So I use that as a differentiator for myself, at least.
I think that one thing I will say about organic foods, they tend to spoil faster.
Mhm.
No doubt about it. So if you're on a budget, and you buy a lot of organic foods, they will spoil faster. And so that's the one thing you need to also consider. But I think overall, vast and large, non-organic products are fine. We've been eating them for hundreds of years. But you got to be careful when you're looking at some of the dirty dozen.
Okay. Under the same vein, and last kind of food item, if you will, wheat and gluten, because there's so much confusion about that also. Is wheat bread bad now? And there's a mold in the, the mills where they have the wheat stored in the silos, and people don't know what to do. And there's a lot of people who have celiac disease now that didn't have it before. So everybody's wondering, are they doing something different with grain now? Should we avoid grain altogether? Or how can we manage grain in our diet in moderation? And one of the things I love about your work, doctor, is you're very common sense, and it's about being smart and being moderate and not being too extreme one way or the other. What's your thoughts on the whole wheat thing?
I think that sometimes trends happen and they get viral and they get all this buzz and all this play. And then all of a sudden, everyone gets hyper alert about it. Like gluten-free, which has been around for a while now, it became this huge trend. But I don't think people understood what gluten-free meant or why gluten-free even exists. I mean, gluten is a structural protein that is found in grains. It's found in wheat, it's found in barley and rye. And there's nothing wrong with gluten in general. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's a protein. But you may have an allergy or a bad reaction to that protein, just like you may have an allergy to pollen. You may have an allergy to hay fever, right? So we all have allergies to different things. Some people have an allergy to shellfish. So gluten is one of those things that some people have an allergy to. Well, if you have an allergy to shellfish, you don't eat shellfish, right?
Of course.
If you have an allergy to gluten, guess what? Don't eat gluten. But that does not mean that everybody else who doesn't have an allergy should stop eating gluten. There's nothing inherently, intrinsically bad about gluten. And this is where the mass media and the internet kind of takes something, a principle, and just blows it out, and it becomes something that it's not. And so there are people who need to eat gluten-free because they have a reaction to the gluten. If you don't have a reaction to the gluten, eating gluten-free foods is not necessary. And the other misperception that people have is that, oh, if it's gluten-free, it's got to be healthier. No, not at all. You can make very unhealthy gluten-free foods, right? You can have gluten-free cookies that are full of calories and full of sugar and other things. They just don't have gluten in them, but they still they can be high in fats. So I think that people have to be very careful when they read and hear that all these, I call it crunchy granola type of trends, like, oh, gluten-free now, I'm gluten-free. Why are you gluten-free? Ask yourself that. Take 10 minutes and understand what gluten is and whether or not you really need to be gluten-free, because you get nothing in addition. Just because you're gluten-free doesn't mean that they're adding something special to the food. They're just taking the gluten out of it.
Okay, you're trim, you stay in shape. And I think what happened with COVID, everybody's got the COVID-15, where people gained a lot of weight. We don't have great dietary patterns, if you will, in terms of how much we eat. And COVID made it worse because everybody's passing by the refrigerator all the time. A lot of takeout, a lot of QS, quick service restaurants, a lot of fast foods. How many times do you eat? Do you do intermittent fasting? And what's your recommendation for people in terms of how much they should eat and how many times they should eat during the day?
Yeah, I'm very open about how I eat. I eat almost everything. Now I'm more plant-based, but I eat almost everything. I do some intermittent fasting. In fact, if people go to my Instagram page, which is at Dr. Ian Smith, spell the doctor out, IAN Smith, I post a lot of my food. I post a lot of my workouts. I post a lot of little hacks, diet hacks, nutrition hacks. But I do some intermittent fasting. I don't eat first thing in the morning. I tend to do what's called a fasted workout, which means that before I eat, I do a workout on an empty stomach after getting up in the morning. Why do I do that? It drives your body more into your fat stores for energy, since you don't have any recent food calories on board. So I do IF. I typically do, which is intermittent fasting. I typically do about a 14-hour fasting and a 10-hour feeding window. I don't eat big dinners anymore. That was another trick that I learned, is that, if you front load your calories in the front part of the day. And so I don't do big dinners. And I also work out at least 4 days a week. I lift a lot of weights. People underestimate the importance of resistance training, which means either free weights or bands, resistance bands. Everyone wants to do the cardio, the walking, the running. That's good for you, but you also need to do resistance training to increase your lean muscle mass, not to grow big muscles necessarily, but to increase your lean muscle mass, because muscles are more metabolically active than people without muscles. So the more lean muscle you have, the higher your metabolism, because you burn calories more. The muscles have to be fed by something. So I do a lot of resistance training. I do cardio, HIIT, high intensity interval training, which people can look that up and see what HIIT is, HIIT. And that's my routine. But you know, I'm pretty consistent. I'm like everyone else. Sometimes I don't want to work out. And sometimes my workouts are not the greatest, but I still do it, knowing that I'm making even a little progress. And I think that people have to have mentality that, not that they shouldn't look at working out as a chore, rather they should look at it as, this is going to make me feel better. It's going to prolong my life. It's going to stave off certain types of diseases.
Well, the book is called Plant Power, Flip Your Plate, Change Your Weight. And a good chunk of the book is recipes, tremendous recipes. So I want to know, who's helping you in the kitchen there, Dr. Ian?
Well, my wife is a vegan. And I'm not. So my wife really helps me with a lot of recipes. I have friends, who help me with recipes. I get recipes from everywhere. You know, I'm on Rachael Ray Show all the time. Right. And so I'll talk to her culinary staff and some of her writers about recipes. Listen, I'm a very simple guy when it comes to cooking. I'm not a great cook, but I know my way around the kitchen. And so I always make sure I find recipes that are affordable, that are easy to make, not a ton of ingredients, but they have to be tasty. Those are my three things I always reach for when I create these recipes. So I know people will love these recipes in the back of the book. They're simple, they're easy, and they're fun.
Last question, hydration. We didn't touch on it, and it's not in the book necessarily, but so important. 80% of Americans are dehydrated. So we really want to help people on our show. So what's your advice to them?
Everyone says 8 cups of water. It's not necessarily 8 cups of water. The amount of water you need to drink is the amount of water you need to replace your daily water loss. We lose water every day, not just through sweating. We lose it through peeing. We lose it through breathing, through our lungs. We lose it, in all kinds of ways. And so what I tell, we lose it, doing number 2, we lose water there too. So what I tell people is the typical amount that most people will need is anywhere from 6 to 10 cups of water. It's hard for me to say what it is. I don't know what everyone's water loss is, but you should be getting at least 6 cups. And if you go up to 8 to 10, all the better. The more you can have, the better. Obviously, there's a case where you can drink too much water. Most people never have to worry about that, by the way, but you're right. Most people are dehydrated and don't realize it.
Exactly.
And a lot of the thing that they're experiencing is because of their dehydration. So I encourage people to drink water. I don't like the taste of plain water, by the way. I'm on record for saying that. I always have to add something, a little lemon, a little citrus, right? I like to add something, just have a little kick. But sitting there and drinking, just kind of a bottle of water just is not exciting to me. But, that's just me.
All right. Before we break, you were kind enough after your last appearance to send me a copy of The Unspoken and about Ashe Cayne. And now you've got another book, a new book in the series, and you've got a green light to, I think, develop the series. I think you're working with Michael Strahan on that, if I read that correctly. Tell us about what's happening real quick in terms of the Ashe Cayne series. Great work about a Chicago ex-cop who's a PI now.
That's right. Yes, Ashe Cayne is the man. The new book is called Wolf Point. And if you like detectives and mysteries, which I love, by the way, this is the other side of my brain. It's fun. It's about a guy basically who leaves the force because he won't participate in a cover-up, but he loves justice. And this guy goes around and takes very few cases. He only takes cases that really intrigue him. It doesn't matter how much money that people want to spend. And everyone goes to this guy. The rich, the poor, the black, the white, everyone likes this guy because he gets it done. And so it just got picked up to become a streaming TV show. So we're in the midst of finishing the pilot script. Michael Strahan, who's one of my best friends, is one of the producers on the project. But if you like some escapism and to get into the world, Chicago, by the way, is the setting. It's a character in the book also because it's a great place to have this type of story in which this guy is going around trying to solve all this stuff. So I encourage people to pick up Wolf Point. The Unspoken is the first one of the series.
Fantastic. My special guest today, Dr. Ian K. Smith, MD. The name of the book is Plant Power, Flip Your Plate, Change Your Weight. A lot of great tips in it and a lot of great recipes. Thank you so much for being back with us on Guys Radio. I look forward to us doing it again. Thank you, Ian.
And I want to encourage people to join my Facebook group.
Please.
If you want to do Plant Power, I'll do it with you. The name of the group is just called Plant Power. We have a great Facebook community you can join.
And the website again is?
driansmith.com. Spell the doctor out.
Fantastic. Keep doing your great work and good luck with the series.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
If you're enjoying the guests and content we bring you each and every week on Guys Radio and TV, please support us by subscribing to our channels. Thank you.